Hey folks, Nathan here. In the recent past, we had an opportunity here to take a look at a prototype, a premium prototype as they call it, for Tiny Epic Dungeons. This is a game from Gamelin Games. I did the honorary producer pledge, so around about June of 2021, I received this in the mail direct from Gamelin Games. And basically what this is was the premium print and play files that existed at the time, which were part of the Kickstarter pledge, or a pledge unto themselves, basically taken to a professional print-on-demand service and combined with basically sort of placeholder components to create this prototype, which included the base game of Tiny Epic Dungeons plus the Tiny Epic Dungeons Stories expansion. We had a chance to take a look at this because I thought it'd be really cool to see kind of what exactly it is that goes into one of these premium prototypes for someone who did the honorary producer pledge. I never actually got a chance to see a video on that sort of thing before, so I figured, heck, since I did it, I'd make one. Now, we have another cool opportunity here. While we wait for the final delivery of the finished version of Tiny Epic Dungeons and its expansion Stories, along with all the cool add-on goodies to arrive to backers, now we get a chance to actually take a look at the finished versions of Tiny Epic Dungeons and Tiny Epic Dungeons Stories. These are indeed the finished versions. One of the other cool things about doing the honorary producer thing is that months in advance of the games actually making their way across the ocean by freight to be sent to the fulfillment hubs to then be sent out to backers, anyone who does an honorary producer pledge winds up getting it basically airmailed straight from the factory to Gamelin Games, who then sends it to you months in advance. So these actually arrived for me. I've been playing with the finished game since September 2021. It's just taken me a while to actually get an opportunity to record about it. And I did say that add-ons are not included yet. Notice here, it is using a Tiny Epic Pirates playmat because the playmat, the player mats, the bag, all that kind of stuff, all the extra goodies, the add-ons for the game, those ship freight just like everything else. For an honorary producer pledge, it's just the game and its expansion that actually arrive significantly early. This is going to be one of our sort of Kickstarter component overview videos that I've done. So what we're going to be looking at here is what's in the different boxes. We're going to be taking a look at what items, if any, were stretch goals and at what amounts and things like that. And because of this unique opportunity, we'll be doing at least some comparisons to the prototype to see kind of how these evolve from one version to the next. One thing you might notice here with the prototype box is it's fairly plain. Right? It's just kind of one solid feel to all of the artwork there. Not so with the finished version. The $60,000 stretch goal mark within the campaign actually provided spot UV on the cover. So a little bit nicer look there. That also applied to Stories, so a bit of a nicer look overall for the packaging. The thickness of the box itself was upgraded at the $30,000 stretch goal mark. I should note that all the cards inside were upgraded to 300 GSM or better ivory core with linen finish and rounded corners at the $45,000 stretch goal mark. Now, since we're going to find that stretch goals and dollar amounts do play a role in our coverage here, we're going to take a look here first at just what exactly it was that could be pledged for how much, the goal for the Kickstarter, and that sort of thing. Sort of a baseline here to work from. Okay. The original goal for this Kickstarter was $15,000. The total amount pledged before any late pledges was $2,110,549 from a total of 41,486 individual backers. That was based on the following types of pledges. You could get a premium print and play of both the base game and the expansion for $10. Again, that is the premium print and play that was used as the basis for that prototype that I showed you in a previous video that we'll do some comparisons to here. Now, if you wanted to get the base game, but just the retail version, without the mini expansion Potions and Perils that is inside the deluxe version, that would run you $25. If you wanted the deluxe version of the base game that includes Potions and Perils, that was $30, or you could get 2 for $55 or 10 for $250. Then there was a gameplay all-in that included the deluxe base game, the expansion, and the premium print and play for $40, or you could get 2 of those for $75. The honorary producer pledge, which is what I did, that was limited to 20 individual backers, which got you the premium prototype using the premium print and play and placeholder components in June 2021, advanced copies of the finished deluxe base game and expansion in September 2021, plus a certificate and the premium print and play files. That was $255. Yeah, it was quite a bit more than just getting the gameplay all in. you pay for the privilege of having your name in the rulebook, getting the prototype, and getting the game a bit early with the little certificate here. But I loved the idea of Tiny Epic Dungeons. I've been waiting for them to do a dungeon crawler, so as soon as they announced it, I was in. Now, the finished game, of course, comes with your rulebook here, your Adventures Manual. Nice full-color rulebook like they do most of the time. In fact, all the time. And then you have this sort of fold-out back page that continues the rules, but also gives you a nice reference here. This game is heavily driven by iconography. It is not text-free, but pretty close to it. I would note here, by the way, that there was a significant change in how death is handled, basically, between the prototype phase, back during that iteration of the print and play, and the finished game. Notice here that in the finished game, if you are unconscious because your health was reduced to 0, and you're laying sort of on your side, as they need to do with the miniature there, then on your next turn, you must perform a rest action to become conscious and stand your miniature up, and after you rest, you may move, and then your turn is over. You cannot perform even free actions, okay, if you started the turn unconscious. They really kind of struggled with how exactly they were going to deal with the idea of being unconscious. At one point, if you were unconscious in a room with an enemy without another hero, the game was immediately over, for example. Back during the prototype phase, it was the opposite. It was a bit more forgiving. That basically the next turn, if you were unconscious when it started, you must perform a rest action, right, to become conscious, stand up your miniature, and you can now move and perform free actions. No heroic, but just free. Okay? So, there was basically, playing around with the idea of trying to make it not too harsh, but also not too lenient, and they hit a happy medium. I would also note before putting the manual away from the finished version that just like in that prototype, you'll see there the honorary producers. There I am right there. That's one of the other perks of the honorary producer pledge. If you don't care about that kind of thing, then there are game reasons for getting stuff early, but just one of the other perks that comes along with it if you're ever considering that for a future Tiny Epic game. Now, before we look at the other components, we're going to look at the cards here. We've looked at these in detail back when we looked at the prototype, but a couple things to notice here. First off, I do have all of my cards sleeved. I used Sleeve Kings. They actually have a bundle that is specifically for Tiny Epic Dungeons in its finished form. I would note, though, that there is a size difference here between the prototype and the finished versions of the cards, although the cards themselves, with very few exceptions, are essentially identical as you go along. But notice here the size difference for Claw of Darkness. All the cards are this size here, this square size. That's a pretty significant little difference there. It's about an 18% difference in size. Yes, I did the math. Basically, the finished cards are 70 by 70 millimeters, and then the prototypes were 76 by 76 because that was the option that was available through the professional print-on-demand house that Gamelin used to turn the premium print and play into that prototype. So the finished versions are smaller, and this does make a difference in terms of the footprint, of course, for the game, because the map tiles are the same size as well, and you can have up to 7 vertically and up to 7 horizontally to create your 49 card grid. So knowing that, having that 18% difference in size here eventually does add up to a nice smaller footprint for the finished version. And I should note here before we look at these map cards that no, it's not going to be possible to actually have a 7x7 full 49 card dungeon. It's just that the maximum you can go from the center where the entrance is 3 horizontally, 3 vertically for a 7x7 maximum grid, despite not having enough cards to actually fill that. Now, eventually they did do a card appendix, a digital card appendix with all kinds of information about how each card is supposed to work and clarifications, and just basically a nice guide here as one of their later stretch goals, which was at the $925,000 stretch goal mark, with the idea being, and this is an earlier print of it, with the idea being that it would finally give, among other things, names to the different rooms that otherwise are not named on the cards themselves. So we'll address these by their room names. You have 4 here where minions will spawn. They're just referred to as minion encounters. 1, 2, 3. Those have different designs, but all essentially the same concept here. Then you have the boss lair, or the boss's lair door card, and the entrance. Those are kind of your special cards. You then have your 7 trap rooms. These include the Bridge of Doom, the Buzzsaw, the Fire Vortex, Shelby's Web. Apparently Shelby is a spider of some kind. The Spiked Log of Impalement, a very RPG sounding name there. The Spike Pit, and the Twisting Brambles, as you see here in that order. Then you have 9 rooms, 9 dungeon cards that are going to basically bring a goblin in to try to kill you. Lots and lots of goblins in the dungeon, but never more than 4 at a time or the game ends. This includes, again, in the order you're seeing them there, the Arcane Altar, the Graveyard, the Jeweled Chest, the Library, the Locked Chest, the Portal, the Pulley Device, the Stairs to Nowhere, and the Vault. Then in the base game here, you have 6 cards that don't really fit into any of the other categories. That's the Armory, the Feast Hall, the Goblin Bunks, the Pharaoh's Tomb, the Well, and the Witch's Cauldron. Speaking of those goblins a moment ago who could come out and kill you, the base game has 6 goblin cards in it, and it's basically 2 copies of 2 of the goblins, and then 1 copy each of 2 other goblins. So we have the Shooty Goblin and the Pokey Goblin are the ones you only get 1 of, then 2 of the Stabby Goblin, and 2 of the Boomy Goblin. That's Boomy. The game then provides 14 possible spells you might use. We have Delver's Luck, Fireball, Cloud of Death, Holy Abundance, Chain Lightning, Dungeon Scry, Dark Bargain, Claw of Darkness, Elemental Charge, Invisibility, Tempest of Arrows, Eagle's Swiftness, Giant Strength, and Conjurer's Gambit. Cool ones to use. They don't have any type of set bonuses, though, for this particular type of loot. For that, you're going to need to get into the loot cards, not the spell cards. There's a total of 26 loot cards in the base game. Yes, there were more loot cards added to the overall experience through stretch goals, but that was into stories here. Now, we're going to look here at these in 2 shots. This here is a shot of 3 sets that you can get. Basically, a set has bonuses the more pieces of the set that you have. One just does nothing by itself, but as you collect more, you get the bonuses down here on the bottom for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Here we have the sets for the Panther, the Phoenix, and the Lion. So that's the Glove of the Panther, Longbow of the Panther, Claw of the Panther, and Cloak of the Panther. They all have their little symbols down in the corner to let you know which set it is. It's also said in the name. We have in each set, by the way, a trinket, of which you have a limit generally of 2. We have 2 items that go in your hand slots, and then 1 that is effectively your armor slot among your inventory here. So for the Phoenix, we have the Ring of the Phoenix, the Great Staff of the Phoenix, the Spell Tome of the Phoenix, and the Robes of the Phoenix. And for the Lion, we have the Greaves of the Lion, Longsword of the Lion, Shield of the Lion, and Plate Mail of the Lion. Me, personally, I tend to really like the Panther set and the Lion set. They're probably my 2 most used sets in playing the game. This one gives you basically health back as you're using melee attacks, and then this one is able to provide you with bonuses to your results when you're doing a ranged attack. So it kind of depends on what type of character you're playing as, but even then, Claw of the Panther is nice for that extra agility there as well. That is an extra 1 to your agility result. We then have the last of the 4 sets here at the bottom. That is the Of the Bear. So we have Warhorn of the Bear, Throwing Axes of the Bear, Great Axe of the Bear, and Studded Jerkin of the Bear. But then, along with that, you have a bunch that are just sort of standalone, that aren't sets with set bonuses, which can be used a little more freely. I mean, it's not like the stuff in the sets can't be used individually, but a lot of their kick comes from those set bonuses, whereas these are just sort of decent on their own without needing the set bonus, at least in theory. I find, your mileage will definitely vary. So we have, for armor, we have the Violet Cape, the Elven Chain, and the Cursed Dragon Scale. Then we have the 3 figurines, all of which have the ability to add one of the dice of that particular color into your rolls. So we have the Ruby figurine focusing on strength, Jade figurine focusing on agility, Amethyst figurine focusing on intellect, all of which are trinkets. Then we have for your hand slots here, the crossbow, the sun hammer, the spiked buckler, and the hookshot. Then you have a total of 8 minions. These are sort of like the little mini bosses. You have to kill a certain number of these to be able to get into the boss's lair. And the game originally was going to have 6, and then 2 were added as a stretch goal at $125,000. Bear in mind, the ooze was originally meant to be the gelatinous cube. There were issues with that, so it's now the ooze. So we have the troll, the dungeon crawler, the dire serpent, the troglodyte, the minotaur, and the ogre in the original 6, and then the ooze and the skeleton in the stretch goal ones. Now, as we look at the non-card physical components, that's one of the things that differs the most between the prototype and the finished version. The prototype just used these little colored meeples here, kind of green, blue, orange, and purple, to represent the minions when they were in play. The finished game, on the other hand, includes little meeples for each one. So we have the skeleton, the ogre, gelatinous cube. Oops, sorry, I mean ooze. Not really a cube anymore. The dire serpent, the dungeon crawler, the troll, the troglodyte, then the minotaur. I would also note that in the prototype, when goblins were in play, similar little blue, orange, green, purple, smaller meeples were used, whereas the finished game has 4 separate numbered cool little meeples here. Now we'll talk about which stretch goals actually upgraded wooden tokens into specific cut pieces here in a moment. But again, kind of looking at the prototype versus the finished version, this is what your disarm token was in the prototype. 7 of these just gray sort of squares, right? But the disarm tokens in the final game are these things here. Just kind of nice, kind of wafer thin almost, it feels like, but pretty cool. In the prototype, your enemy health, and focus tokens were just these colored cubes, gray, red, and yellow. Whereas in the finished game, they're still essentially the same colors, but you have the health ones done as hearts, focus done as a lightning bolt. In the prototype, altar markers were just these little round black pieces, and then your torch marker was just this octagon-looking thing here. In the finished version, there's your altar tokens with a symbol on them to match the cards. The torch is now this green torch. Then here's your boss token from the prototype, just like a black pawn, and the finished game here, at least from the base game. We'll see another one of these in red from stories and a red pawn to match. Now, before we move on beyond all those various little wooden components here, we should note here that the tokens were upgraded to wood and their shapes sort of bit by bit. So the hero health, enemy health, and focus tokens that I showed you there as a group, those were upgraded to wood at the $75,000 stretch goal. Then at $100,000, that's when they upgraded the disarm tokens, the ones with a little key symbol in them. Then the torch marker, altar markers, dungeon boss markers, both for base and stories, and the objective tokens that we will eventually see for stories, those were all upgraded to wood at $200,000. Then at $250,000, $250,000, the goblin tokens were changed to the wooden tokens, and at $300,000, that's when the minion tokens became these individualized screen-printed meeples. Now, one thing I find really cool as an upgrade from the prototype to the finished game, these were the dice in the prototype, right? So they're just kind of dice there with the stickers on them. I love the mechanics of these dice. The fact that, if you have an unused 6, you can restore a health. If you have an unused 1, for instance, you can barely see it there. You have those lightning bolts that give you focus. And the idea that you can use all of these individually, but a 1 or a 2 can actually be added to a result. Then you have the enemy die that causes various things to happen. If you're actually fighting an enemy, you use these far more than that one. But this was the prototype version of it. And there were a few different iterations they went through to land on the finished version, including sort of a cool swirl effect that was a stretch goal at $350,000. And they look really nice. Those are these. So, really nice. They're engraved. They've got that swirl in them. They're also significantly smaller than these were, right? So from a prototype to finished version perspective, these are much easier to roll and easier to carry around, much easier to see the lightning bolts on them, the lightning bolt effect. Love the way they designed these dice. As we get into the various big cards, which are going to be various in type, one thing I would note here is among them, stored in my box at least, is where I've got that certificate of authenticity for the Honorary Producer thing, basically. So it says, we recognize you as an Honorary Producer for Tiny Epic Dungeons. Thank you for your support. Has the signatures there. This says a campaign funding ended on, and then it tells when and the total amount and all that kind of stuff and how many backers. Gives you a specific number out of the 20 available. Has that little seal up there. Blank on the back. But this, For me, it just goes into the box with my finished copy. Or maybe I'll store it with the prototype. Not entirely sure yet, because I'm going to be playing this game quite a bit. I already have been, and this just kind of sits in the bottom of the box where it could get dinged, so maybe I'll stick it in the prototype box. Now let's talk big cards. You have your torch mat there for Act 1 with Act 2 on the back. Basically, Act 1 is the main game. Act 2 is once the boss is active here. But then the game comes with 6 bosses. Now, 4 of these were originally planned. 2 of them were stretch goals. The 2 stretch goals are over here on this side. So the planned ones, we had the Dragon, the Gorgon, the Goblin King, and the Seer. The stretch goals were the Hydra and the Pharaoh. Those were added at the $150,000 stretch goal mark. I should note there is an add-on to actually give you little wooden meeples for these, just like for the minions, but that was an add-on, so it has not been delivered yet. It was part of the many, many add-ons I mentioned earlier that are still incoming with the regular fulfillment of the game. Then we have the base game's 8 heroes that you can play as. The 6 down here were originally in the game. These 2 were stretch goals here. So, from the base game, we had Eterna, Win-Kelas, Thordan Firebraid, Grokul, Ulesia, and Moonblade. I tend to like playing as Moonblade quite a bit. But then Sir Lannan here, who I've played as quite a bit as well, Sir Lannan there was added as the $425,000 stretch goal, and Jaren the Blue was added as the $500,000 stretch goal. If you are concerned about classes, or if you're curious about that, going in the same order again, Eterna is the Elf Sorceress, then we have the Elf Ranger, the Dwarf Fighter, the Half-Orc Barbarian, the Dwarf Cleric, the Wood Elf Rogue, the Human Paladin, and the Ancient Wizard. Again, these are all from the base game. Now, of course, another giant difference between the prototype and the finished game is that these were what represented your heroes back in the prototype. Yellow, red, blue, and green little, quasi-pawn-looking things. In the finished game, for the first time ever in a Tiny Epic game, we get minis for each one. Very, very sweet here. Let's take a look at them. If you'll pardon the terrible focusing here, if I keep it at this distance, it should look all right. We have Moonblade here. Keep my hand here so it focuses. We have Thordan Firebraid here. Nothing on the bottoms or anything here. Win-Kelas. Uliesa, who I always mispronounce, so I probably mispronounced her earlier as well. Let's go with the base game still. Eterna. Grokul. Okay. Jaren the Blue with his enormous book. Then Sir Lannan. And if you're wondering about the height, you can store them in the box standing up, but not in the Stories expansion that's shorter than this. Basically, though, in the main box, all of them are just barely short enough to fit if you, run them around the edges. For instance, if you have sleeved cards and you want to make sure that they're not causing any storage issues. Now, the big difference if you paid extra to get the deluxe version is that it comes with this mini expansion called Potions and Perils inside the base game. And it basically gives you 2 new bosses, the Demon Lord and the Lich. It gives you 1 new room, Mixie's Lab, that's used with the potions. You then have 2 new minions, the Vampire Imp and the Wraith, both of which come with meeples. Then you have Mixie Goblin, and you got 2 of those, so you can use them again with the potion aspect of Potions and Perils. The potions themselves are represented by 4 potion cards. We have the Magic Elixir, the Haste Drought, the Mind Tonic, the Strength Filter, Philter, the Epic Mugga Ale, the Witch's Brew, the Bottle of Energy, and the Healing Potion. That brings us to the Stories expansion. So it's going to have its own little rulebook here. As I mentioned, Spot UV on the cover of it. I would note that inside the Stories expansion, you got a cool world map of Ogmore, the world where all the Tiny Epic stuff and several other games of theirs take place. The Stories aspect that gives the expansion its name comes down to basically extra win conditions and setup conditions on these story cards. We have 8 of them: a Dimensional Debt, Rescue the Adventurers, the Golden Phoenix, sacrifice a minion, scry into the future, purify the aquifer, curse of the hobgoblin, and the pyrotechnic heist. And I would note that between the finished version of the game and the prototype that preceded it, I've only noticed one change in all the different cards. And the card that has the change is sacrifice a minion. The finished version under success and failure here says a minion is killed in the arcane ritual room. All minions are killed before success as your success or failure. The original just said a minion is killed in a ritual, and then all minions are killed before success. So minor change there, just making it a specific room. I would note here, since we're going to take a quick look at all the card backs real fast at the end here, that the story cards need information on the back, so they actually don't have a uniform back. It's just a uniform style of information. Notice they also have the S symbol up here for stories that we see on all the Stories expansion content. Now, the Stories expansion was originally meant to come with 4 new pieces of loot. Those are the ones up here that are not part of sets. We have 3 trinkets and 1 item that goes in your hand, weapon, etc. So we have the dungeon map, the bedrolls, the everlit torch, the trinkets, and the ceremonial spear. But as a stretch goal, at the $535,000 mark, we got the Scarab set. So this has, again, trinket, 2 things for your hands, 1 armor. We have the Orbs of the Scarab, the Ward of the Scarab, the Magic Blade of the Scarab, and the Vestments of the Scarab. Basically very protective here. And then we have the Viper set, right here, the second row, and that was a stretch goal at the $570,000 mark. And again, in the same order of type, Eyes of the Viper, Fangs of the Viper, Smoke Pellets of the Viper, and Shadow Gi of the Viper. And for what it's worth, this always makes me think that when you're playing with any of those pieces, you should use that old, was it 1980s, 1970s joke or whatever, which I think even made it into G.I. Joe, right? You know, I am the Viper. I come to wash and wipe your windows, right? So you must make those type of gags the entire time you are wearing the Viper set. That is a house rule. We then have 5 new dungeon cards for locations within the dungeon. This is the Stairs Down card that is used for any of your multi-level dungeon delving, which is something that is allowed with the Stories expansion. The other ones are all rooms that are attached to specific Stories missions. Voila, there they are. So for the Divination Pool, you've got Scry into the Future. For the Phoenix room, you've got the Golden Phoenix. For the Prison, Rescue the Adventurers. And then the Bomb Stockpile, that's what that room is called, that ties into the Pyrotechnic Heist. So, rooms you need to be able to play these special story scenarios. The Stories expansion then also introduces 2 new goblins, the Spelly Goblin and the Mighty Goblin, along with 2 new minions, the Golem and the Fire Elemental, both of which have, of course, their own meeples. To return to more of the non-card components real quick, again in the prototype, enemy health markers. These are the enemy health markers in the finished version with the heart shape. This is also found in Stories because you're going to need a couple more health markers. You'll also need a second boss token at times. So in the prototype, it was a red pawn to go with the black one. Now it's kind of a dark red, almost brown boss token here. You also need objective markers, and in the prototype, they were just these cylinders of brown and red, which in the finished version are actual meeples, or tokens, each of which is labeled in this case with a letter, not just color-coded. Stories also introduces 2 new bosses, the Tinkerer and the Mind Lasher. And since this is our last time looking at one of the bosses, this is the map that helps you track how many minions you've taken out to know when to make the boss available and allow you to actually get into his lair. The lair itself is actually represented on the card. I talked about that when talking about the prototype, and there's plenty of people out there doing preview videos and stuff for the game that can do a much better job of that than I can overall. So we're just looking at components here. Stories then also gave us 8 more heroes, doubling the number of heroes in the game. So we have the 6 originally intended and 2 that were stretch goals. The 6 originally intended here are Zezili, the human monk, Clotho, the human psionic, Zui Zhang, I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly, the Pandakin Brewmaster, Evelyn, the Dryad Druid, yeah, Dryad Druid. We have a Taurus, the Elf Warlock, Nilly Songheart, the Halfling Bard, and then our two stretch goals up there at the top. We have Laura Gambit. Now, Laura Gambit, who is very much like a cross between sort of Lara Croft and Indiana Jones there, joined the game at the $650,000 stretch goal, and then at the $730,000 stretch goal, we got the sort of iconic Sir Gamelin, the Guardian of the Order. Laura Gambit is the human adventurer. Sir Gamelin, or a variant of Gamelin, as this character that looks like this, like sort of an embodiment of the logo with the rest of the body, does show up in various Tiny Epic games and whatnot, kind of as an ongoing running theme, so to speak. And then, of course, 8 new heroes means 8 new minis. So we have Laura Gambit, Sir Gamelin, who is definitely the bulkiest of all of them there with his cape. Though running a close second, Zui Zhang. I don't think he's as bulky, but then again, he doesn't have a cape. Clotho. Zezili. Evelyn. I'm trying to keep this where there's a decent chance of having it in okay focus. A Taurus. And then finally, Nilly Songheart the Bard. And since this is the last time we're looking at the heroes, the back of each hero is a reference sheet. Then before we leave physical components completely, let's check out the card backs. We've got the card backs for loot, spells, potions only from Potions and Perils, goblins, minions, and dungeon cards. I showed you the identifier a moment ago for stories. Potions and Perils has this little symbol here. All the base game components have that symbol there. So the last of the actual stretch goals was that card appendix. It was at the $925,000 stretch goal. Prior to that, at the $850,000 stretch goal, we had the Glorious Victories. Basically just a list of achievements that you can sort of check off as you go, as you achieve them during play. There was also a set of digital stories provided for each character at the $800,000 stretch goal mark. And then they also provided 2 digital gifts for backers, which was a digital map of Ogmore, similar to the map, of course, that is inside the stories box that I showed you there, and audio versions of all of those hero stories from back at that $800,000 stretch goal mark, which is kind of nice. But there you have it, folks. I know it took me a while here, but finally, on top of our look previously at the prototype for Tiny Epic Dungeons, the premium prototype for Honorary Producer backers, now we finally have a chance to see all the content here for regular Tiny Epic Dungeons, its deluxe expansion content, the mini expansion Potions and Perils, and its full-blown expansion, Stories. These should be arriving, I believe they're saying right now they're targeting January-ish, so it should be fairly soon for backers and then eventually available through retail. Typically, if you're looking for the deluxe version, it tends to be available on Gamelin Games' website, but not through regular retail channels most of the time. So, Stories, doesn't matter which version you get. The base game, personally, I would recommend Potions and Perils, so grab the deluxe version off of Gamelin's website if you get the opportunity for that. Very, very fun game, and I will be back to take a look at all those various add-on items, like the play mat for the entire game, the player mats for individual players, the extra meeples, and all that kind of stuff, the dice tray, everything, when those finally arrive with the regular shipments out to backers, again, sometime, hopefully, in January 2022. I hope you've liked this early look at Tiny Epic Dungeons and its expansion. I hope it gets you excited for the game. The game is really fun to play. I would note here, because a lot of solo players do play the Tiny Epic games, that this is not a true solo Tiny Epic game. In order to play solo, you are expected to play as 2 players, if that makes a difference in your decision on picking up the game. For me, it's my favorite of the Tiny Epic games, but again, dungeon crawls for Tiny Epic was kind of what I was always hoping for, and they finally did it. So, of course, it's my favorite. Question is, will it be yours? We'll see soon. Thanks for watching.